Well, welcome to this video. I am in this video. I'm going to be biking from west central Edmonton to a suburb called Edgemont. Edgemont is outside of the ring road of Edmonton, which is kind of like our main freeway that goes around the whole city. And then we have suburbs that are developing outside of the Henday. And many people, one of the reasons I'm doing this is because a lot of people talk about how it's impossible to, in a sense, like bike in the suburbs, or it's very challenging to bike to these new suburbs outside the Henday, which I agree. It's not convenient, it's not easy, but I want to give it a try. I have some friends who live out here, and I want to see, hey, could I go to one of their houses from my house using a bike instead of just driving, which would be the default for most people. And so as you can see here, I'm biking along this road. It's early spring, so lots of potholes, as you can see on some of these roads, but just biking heading west right now towards the Anthony Henday from west to central Edmonton. And in these neighborhoods, one of the things that Edmonton could work on is having more separated bike infrastructure in some of the central areas. Our downtown, Strathcona University does have that, but then in some of these like older suburbs, mature suburbs, we don't. We have lots of like quiet residential streets, which aren't bad, but not ideal for kids, for maybe new riders, less confident riders to be coming up here to 170th Street. So this is part of the inner ring road of Edmonton. So you can see it's a pretty wide road, lots of cars here. It goes past West Edmonton Mall. And 170th Street, for context, if you like thought of a city like Vancouver and how big is Vancouver versus Edmonton, 170th Street is kind of like the border of Vancouver relative in geography and size. So right now we're like leaving Vancouver, essentially biking towards, say, Surrey. And that's the size of Edmonton. And I think one of the issues that we have with sprawl, with driving, with being walkable and bikeable, is that we're really spread out. We're a pretty low density city. And so there's lots of improvements that we can make in that area. And so heading west here. This is a good spot, I think, to highlight. You can see on the right here in the grass, there's like some desire lines, some places where you can tell that people are walking, biking quite a bit. And this would be, I think, a good example of an area where a city could make a big improvement. There's a good amount of space there. This is like a main artery heading into a residential area that connects to different elementary schools and high schools. And, like I said, the mall employs tens of thousands of people. And so building a multi-use path in this kind of area where someone like me doesn't have to be on the road here in a lane, especially when it's busy, it's not as easy for cars to pass. I'd rather have a multi-use path that I could hop on the side here, stay off the road. And I think improvements like that could really make a big difference in our city, make it easier for people to get around with a bike, do so safely. And so what I'm doing here on the west side, you'll see in a sec, is I went on Google Maps and was trying to figure out, okay, how do I get to my friend's house from where I live? I don't think there's like bike lanes and paths all the way. So do I have to go on the road, or what are the options? I found these like interesting little paths. So you can see this is a shared use path. It's meant for both walking and biking. And there's these they're like older sidewalks. They're not the multi-use paths that are like smooth asphalt, but they're like older sidewalks. They have lots of cracks in them because they're older, but they loop in between all of these housing developments. So a lot of these developments are a bit older. Some of them are low income, affordable housing. They're actually decent density. A lot of them are townhomes and smaller apartments, but they have these pathways in between them that are really interesting, that actually they're completely separated from the road. They loop through a lot of these kind of older neighborhoods on the west side. And I thought they were really interesting. I'd never biked them before, so I thought I'd check them out. And to be honest, they're not the worst, but they're definitely not the best. You can see they have pretty good connectivity in terms of they take me really far here. But at the same time, they're not intuitive for wayfinding, and they're not super comfortable because they're sidewalks, not asphalt. So they're pretty bumpy, lots of cracks. It's really tight to pass people on them. There's not a ton of space for passing. But what is nice is that you're separated from cars, so you don't have to worry about being too close to a car or even breathing in the fumes. I think lots of areas where we could improve these kind of paths to go, hey, let's make them smoother, let's make them wider, make them asphalt, and then also we need to figure out what's the wayfinding for these kind of pathways. So we're heading over right now the Whitemud. This is one of our kind of east-west freeways through the city, and heading south to go over this right now. One of the good things is that you can see here this bridge is one of, I think, 5 or 6 on the west side of our city that help pedestrians, bikers get over the Whitemud without having to interact too much with cars. So that's really helpful, really nice to have those kind of vital connections, and definitely not cheap to build those if they didn't exist. So thankful that those are there. But as you can see, having a bike along more of these weird shared use paths, sidewalks, residential areas, looping my way through. It's not intuitive. I was on my phone following some Google Maps route, trying to make sure I was going the right way. And this also isn't very time efficient. It's not the most direct route compared to some of the roads that I could have taken. But I took it because I wanted to see, what are these paths like. So now we're heading out onto what's called 178th Street. We're heading south. We're going again to Edgemont, which is a community in the southwest of Edmonton outside of our ring road. And so I'm biking along the road here, and this is a sidewalk. But what's interesting, I found this out on the way back, is that the other side of this road actually has a multi-use path. And so I'm not sure why there's only a multi-use path on one side, a sidewalk on the other. Maybe this will become a new path once some of the infrastructure hits end of life. I'm not sure, but I think these are good roads where we should have multi-use paths because it enables people to safely bike and not be too close to other people and pass, and be able to cover pretty far distances. You'll see here I head south for a while on this road, and this could be pretty quick if you had a multi-use path, and especially if you were on an e-bike or just a faster road bike. But you can't go too fast when it's a sidewalk because you gotta look out for other people, be careful. So yeah, I think that's an area where we could improve, make some better options. Now this road's kind of interesting. You can see here there's this big grass area on the side. So I'm heading west now, and this is a 2-lane road that it has space to become a 4-lane road, but it probably never will because this is actually an older area. It's already built up and developed. And the city does this. I actually really like this, where they kind of build two lanes initially, and then they wait to see, hey, is there capacity where we need to add 2 more lanes in these neighborhoods? And I'm not a fan of widening, roads and highways a ton, but I do think that, lots of neighborhoods benefit from having 4 lanes versus just 2 when it comes to right turns and left turns and traffic moving efficiently. But this is a good area where the capacity never reached the need to have 4 lanes. And so I don't know if the city will do something with that green space, make some parks, do something interesting with it. But I'm thankful that the city, builds that way. And so as you can see again here, heading west on this weird sidewalk shared use path. It's kind of bumpy, but it's efficient, moving a long distance here. I think this is an interesting example of where in Edmonton, an e-bike is so helpful. I'm not on an e-bike, I'm just on an acoustic bike. I'm going 15 to 20 kilometers an hour for most of this route. But I could imagine if you're going, 25 to 30 kilometers an hour, that really speeds up how fast a trip like this could take. It took me about 35 minutes to do this trip. And that's not, ridiculous. That's not undoable, but it's not ideal. 35 is pretty long. You could drive this in probably 20 minutes. And so it's definitely an area where if you had an e-bike and you could do it in 20-25 minutes, I think that makes a really big difference in just accessibility, how willing someone would be to bike, especially in the winter. In the winter you can't bike as fast, take a little longer, but if you had a good e-bike equipped for the winter, you could definitely do this route still see your friends. So we're coming up here to an overpass that goes over the Henday. So the Henday is the ring road of our city. It's kind of like what separates the outer suburbs and then the more central city. And so this is an interesting divide as you head into the new suburbs. What is nice is that they have a lot of these multi-use paths, but you can see they're so car dependent in their development. There's gravel all over this multi-use path because no one cares about it because so few people use it. And so you have these big suburban shopping centers with cars turning everywhere. You gotta really look out in these areas for people turning right and looking left and those kind of challenges. But yeah, it is nice that you can still bike. Some American cities don't even have sidewalks in their suburbs. And so I'm really thankful that in Edmonton, we do have these larger mixed use paths that you can rely on. You just don't have the same, maybe say at an intersection like this, the same kind of supporting infrastructure. And so yeah, these wide paths, I think, make it easier to bike than many would assume in these newer areas. But I think the challenge is that they're still developed for cars. And so the average way that someone gets around is with a car, even if they could go, say, the grocery store on their bike using a path like this, which is wide, it's quiet, it's separated from cars, it's safe, it's pretty quick. If you're going from your house to store. It might take 5 minutes to drive. It maybe takes 7 minutes to bike it. So it's pretty reasonable. But I think the challenge is that, yeah, people just don't see bikes as maybe a reasonable way to move around for trips or for commuting, but rather just as a way to kind of like maybe do recreation or to spend time with their kids. And so, yeah, I think these paths, they have a lot of promise. If our city can identify which ones to clear in the winter, I think that's also helpful for making it possible for people to bike. One of my brothers, brother-in-law who lives really close to actually where I'm biking right now, he says that he will use his bike to make trips to, say, like the grocery store or to take the kids somewhere nearby for like an appointment. And I think that's really interesting that like a lot of times the bike and car conversation can become about, getting rid of cars and using your bike for everything, which in a city like Edmonton, people just don't think is realistic. But I think it's really realistic in Edmonton to actually use your bike multiple times a week for trips. And paths like this make that possible. So it's not always about getting rid of your car, but also like just reducing how many car trips you make. And that's, I think, kind of what I'm, trying to figure out is how often can I use my bike instead of my car, and is that possible? So I'm coming up here to a shopping center. I'm making a stop to get some drinks before watching a hockey game at a friend's house. And so it's nice to have this is a cool example of some infrastructure, connects right to the bike path. Don't have to worry about going around to like a car street entrance, but I can just take this path up. But then, of course, your classic like car strip mall area, as soon as you come out, you don't really have a lot of support for not having to interact with cars. And so if I had kids or something like that with me, I'd have to probably get them off their bikes and we'd walk around the edges. So I think there's opportunity here for developers in our city to look at how do we make a shopping center like this more friendly for pedestrians, for bikers. Maybe have the parking in the back, have a wider sidewalk that people can walk and bike on, have that out front, have the stores facing the street. Small improvements like that I think could really make a big difference for accessibility, for safety. And so, yeah, made a quick stop, and now I'm just heading out last couple 100 meters here to my friend's house. They're in a brand new suburb. You can see still getting built, lots of construction around. And the multi-use paths in these neighborhoods are great for like the bigger roads, doing the long stretches. But I think what breaks down a lot of these new suburbs and is a big inhibitor to biking is like these final stretches. So this is the last couple 100 meters, and as you can see, it's sidewalks and then pretty busy roads. They're winding. There's not a lot of stop signs, so people start going pretty fast. You've got parked cars on all sides that are pulling out, and it's just not, you could get doored. It's not a great place to bike. So I think our city needs to figure out how do we make these areas safer. But yeah, this is basically the end of the trip. It is possible to bike. It took about 35 minutes to get to Edgemont from West Central. It's doable with an e-bike. It's even more doable. Is it safe for all ages and abilities? No. But is it possible? Are there things to celebrate like the multi-use paths and even those like weird shared use concrete, old paths in the old neighborhood? Like those aren't bad. But I think we can also see here lots of areas for improvement, lots of areas where we can have more separated bike infrastructure, where we can have better wayfinding, where we can have better crossings. And yeah, in many ways, also just like a city that's more dense and a city that's not as spread out, because this is a pretty far distance to bike. Like I said, this is like me biking from central Vancouver out to Surrey to see a friend. It's pretty far. And I think, a city like Edmonton with a bit over 1 million people doesn't need to be that spread out. And so we can build denser, we can build more walkable, more bikeable. But the good news is that you can still bike. You can still bike from the middle of our city to one of the newest areas. So hopefully, people can consider that, and people can bike more for more of their trips. And our city can keep getting better, safer for more bikers. So hope you enjoyed this video, some of the commentary along the way. Hope you maybe learned something, and that you can continue to find ways to bike more and become more sustainable, more healthy in how we get around.